What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Busy Dad's Board Gaming. My name is Neil Odette, and today I'm going to be reviewing Red Rising, the Collector's Edition, published by Stonemaier Games, who provided me with a copy of the game. So, let's dive right into it. In Red Rising, we dive into a dystopian society in which you'll be playing and representing one of the houses within that society, doing your best to rise to power as you scrounge and piece together an assortment of followers. If you're unfamiliar, Red Rising is inspired by the book series of the same name created by Pierce Brown. It's a card drafting, hand management game for 1 to 6 players. At the beginning of the game, players are dealt a hand of 5 cards, and throughout the course of the game will be trying to increase the value of their hand through the card's core values as well as end-of-game bonuses and abilities. You'll be doing this through the use of 2 possible actions in the game: lead and scout. When you lead, you'll take a card from your hand and deploy it to a location of your choice, triggering the card's deployability if it has any. Then you'll select a card from atop a row of cards on another location and then use that location's bonus to advance on the fleet track, gain helium, gain the sovereign token, or place influence at the Institute. If you prefer not to take cards from any of those available on the board, you can instead take a card from the top of the deck and then roll the rising die in order to determine your bonus. If you're happy with the cards in your hand and don't wish to change anything, you can instead take the scout action, in which you'll reveal the top card from the deck and then place it on any location on the board and gain that bonus. The end game is triggered when all 3 of the following conditions are met by any combination of players, or when 2 conditions are met by the same player: have 7 or more helium tokens, have 7 or more influence on the Institute, or reach or surpass 7 on the fleet track. If you would like to see a full how to play video, you'll find a link in the description below. But for now, let's get into the review. My first impressions of Red Rising were pretty good. I had heard a lot about the game prior to playing it, and the common consensus was it was just okay, with a lot of people complaining that there was just too much reading. So I was a little apprehensive going into our first game. To be honest, there was a lot of reading to do in our hands of cards. That meant making any meaningful decisions in the first couple of turns was somewhat tricky and a little difficult. However, by the time everyone had had 3 or 4 turns, we managed to get a grip on what cards were meshing well together and what ones could be improved. And the remainder of the game went pretty smooth, with everyone having a pretty good time. Myself included, despite the fact that I lost, no surprise there, by a pretty substantial margin. Now, let's talk theme a little bit, because this is where Red Rising kind of falls short for me a little. Overall, I have no issue saying that Red Rising is a good game. I enjoy playing it any chance that we can get it to the table. That being said, for me, a person who is unfamiliar with the book series by Pierce Brown, the theme of the game becomes pretty irrelevant. When I look at a hand of cards, it's just some numbers and text with some pretty nice illustrations of characters that I can only assume are from the series. I never used to think that familiarity with an intellectual property was important until recently, when I got the chance to play the Critical Role Munchkin game. I'm a huge fan of Critical Role and all the work that they've done. And when I sat down to play that particular version of Munchkin, I was hooked immediately, as I was able to play with characters I was familiar with and sort of be in that world. All of that is to say that if you aren't familiar with Red Rising, the theme of the game likely isn't going to do much for you. On the flip side, if you're a big fan of the series, then you'll definitely enjoy the game as you get to have one of those, oh hey, I know this person from the book, which can really elevate the enjoyment of a game for some people. Moving on to quality, that is something I never have an issue with when it comes to Stonemaier Games. Again, I will reiterate that I do have the collector's edition, which does come with metal components as opposed to wood or plastic, as well as the card stands matching the 6 house colors in the game. So I really have nothing bad to say about those. Further to that, and this might sound weird if you're not a huge gamer. I mean, it might sound weird even if you are a huge gamer, but I absolutely love the feel of the paper that Stonemaier Games uses in their rulebooks. To me, it just screams quality. Lastly, the character cards themselves have a really nice feel and weight to them. And if you do decide to pick up the collector's edition, you'll get beautiful gold foil that is on all the gold colored cards. It's just a nice little touch that has no bearing on the game itself, but is just so great to look at when you get them in your hand. The insert for the box is also really well done, keeps everything nice, tidy, and in its place, which is always a plus. That brings us to art. The art in Red Rising is absolutely phenomenal. Now, I can't say for sure if those characters are accurately portrayed based on what's in the books, but what I can say is that there are 112 character cards in Red Rising. And as far as I know, there are no duplicates whatsoever. So that means that there are 112 completely unique illustrations of all these different characters from the world of Red Rising. The artists just did the best job as far as I'm concerned. However, I do have minor issues. Some of the colors they chose for the cards are far too similar. I can't tell you how many times I rummaged through a location on the board for a gold card just to realize it was yellow. There are other colors that are similar to each other as well, such as gray and silver and brown and copper, but the difference between yellow and gold is probably the worst, for me at least. Moving on, the thing I liked most of all about our first playthrough of Red Rising has got to be how easy it was to learn and teach the game. After everyone is sat down at the table, you can deal out the starting hand of 5 cards, give everyone a few moments to read through their cards, and then get right into teaching the game, which would essentially go something like this. The goal of the game is to have the highest point total at the end. The cards in your hand have point values in the top left corner, and the majority of cards have bonus scoring at the bottom. You fulfill the requirements and you get the extra points. You'll also score points based on your position on the fleet track, how many influence tokens you have at the Institute, how much helium you have, and you also get 10 points at the end of the game if you have the Sovereign token. On your turn, you can take a lead action or a scout action. To take the lead action, you take a card from your hand and deploy it on a location. If it has a deploy ability indicated by this symbol here, you do what it says on the card. After that's done, you can take a card from any other location on the board. Depending on where you take it from, you'll get a bonus. Jupiter lets you advance on the fleet track. Mars nets you helium. Luna allows you to grab the Sovereign token. And the Institute allows you to place an influence on that location. If you don't like any of those options, you can take a card from the top of the deck and then roll the rising die to determine the bonus that you'll get. If you really like the cards in your hand, I suggest you take the scout action. With this action, you just draw the top card from the deck and place it in any location, not deploy it, so you don't get the ability if there is one. But you do get the location's bonus depending on where you placed it. Then you can pretty much just talk about the end game triggers and you're done. That literally took less than 2 minutes and is more than enough information, I think, that players are going to need in the first turn or two. So not too bad overall. Before I talk about the overall gameplay experience, I did want to touch on a little bit of an issue we faced at higher player counts, and that is waiting in limbo for your next turn. There isn't a ton of player interaction in Red Rising, and despite player turns being pretty simple, there can, at times, be a lot of waiting around for your turn. This is because cards do have some degree of text on them, and every card in the game is unique to some extent. The person to your left might have a good idea of what they're going to do on their turn, but as soon as you play your card to a location, it might cover what they intended to do. So now they have to read through the card you just played, then likely reread all the other cards again on the other locations while they try and decide what card fits well within their hand, if there are any. This can take a couple of minutes, especially for players that generally suffer from analysis paralysis. Put 6 people around the table all going through the same thing, and you could be waiting up to 10 minutes for your turn. It's not going to be an issue for everyone, but it's just something I thought I would mention nonetheless. Now, gameplay. Right out the gate, I'll just say it. I really like the gameplay of Red Rising for a couple of reasons. I've mentioned this before on another video or maybe on Instagram, but I really enjoy games that have you scoring ridiculous amounts of points. I think it adds to the overall excitement and general feeling of accomplishment in a game. The fact that at the end of the game you could be scoring upwards of 2, maybe 300 points, I think is a really good choice for Red Rising. Secondly, the simplicity is just great. This is definitely an easy game to learn, as I mentioned before, so anyone can jump in and start playing, no problem. But it is incredibly hard to master. And to be honest, I don't even think this is the sort of game that can be mastered, as much of it boils down to making the right decision at the right time and sticking to a certain strategy that in the end could come down to whether you got lucky enough to get the cards you needed or not. And third, one word: variability. I've mentioned it already, but there are 112 unique cards in this game, and each of those characters score points in different ways. So the likelihood that you'll ever play the same hand of cards is near impossible. I would say even if you tried, I don't think you could do it. The last thing I'll touch on before giving my final thoughts is player interaction. There is a bit of take that in Red Rising, and if that's not something you're familiar with, it's basically a board game mechanic that sees players directly interacting with each other and in some instances directly attacking the progress towards winning the game. Some people love it, others not so much. I typically tend to enjoy it, as I like messing with my opponents any opportunity I get, and it doesn't really bother me if it happens to me, if I end up being the brunt of the attack. What tends to happen in Red Rising, though, is that you'll latch onto a couple of cards to build your hand around, and you'll continue to do that throughout the game until you're satisfied with your hand, and then you just use your turns to scout until the end of the game conditions are triggered. The problem with that is that once you start scouting, it becomes very obvious to everyone around you that you are essentially good to go and just want the game to be over as quickly as possible. So other players at the table will start playing cards that make you discard cards from your hand at random, and you could end up with a completely disjointed hand of cards that just don't work well together at all. This can be really disheartening and frustrating for some players, as depending on when it happens during the game, it can be near impossible to come back from. But if your players are up for it, and can take it all in stride, as my group tends to do. You just swear at each other a little bit and yell for a few seconds, then have a good laugh, and then just continue on. Because at the end of the day, if a player can completely cripple your hand of cards and your chances at victory, you can do the same to them. And I suggest that you do. So where does that leave us overall? I think in a pretty good position, to be honest. If you're looking for something that's quick and easy to get to the table, quick and easy to learn and teach, incredibly varied in terms of ways to score points, and you're okay with a little light rating and players messing with you from time to time, I think you'll really enjoy Red Rising, especially if you're already a fan of the series. If you want a really deep experience with a ton of things you can do and a ton of actions you can take on your turn, then you might want to look elsewhere. But there you have it. That was my review of Red Rising, the Collector's Edition. Go ahead and smash that subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified on any future videos. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Links for everything in the description below. But until next time, thanks for watching and happy gaming.